So I'm going to turn it over to Jack, who will introduce, well, get the story going and then introduce our special guest for this evening. Over to you, Jack.
Right. Thanks a lot, Paul. I'm honored to do this. This is something we've never done before. I'm going to be talking for a little bit about the context of the program tonight, but then I'm going to turn it over to Beauvais Lyons, who's going to be introduce you to some fascinating artists who have found different ways to interpret the history, the fascinating history of Vine Street in Knoxville history. But I want to just give a little background about what Vine Street is, or Vine Avenue. It's actually, the formal name is Vine Avenue, but it's been called Vine Street informally for most of its history. It's been called lots of things over the years. It was called the Black Broadway of Knoxville. It was called Little Harlem. One of my favorite descriptions of it, nicknames, was when I got to interview Howard Armstrong of the original Tennessee Chocolate Drops. I interviewed him late in his life, but he formed this band back in the 1920s on Vine Street and recorded a song in honor of it. But Howard Armstrong loved Vine Street. He is a young fiddler and mandolinist who played blues and jazz, which are genres you don't expect to hear on fiddle and mandolin. He played them in barbershops and pawn shops and little arcades and things along Vine Street. He loved the place. He called it the Big Gut. It was like the center of everything. That was how he knew it. But it was especially known for African American culture, but it was a mixed race place with a lot of immigrants, especially. And it's interesting how many Eastern European immigrants lived and did business along Vine Street in its early days. Rabbi Isaac Winnick lived on East Vine Street 120 years ago. He was from Eastern Europe, came here and founded the first, a more conservative synagogue than we had before that, which became known as Heska Amuna, which also was located on East Vine Street in its early days. But Rabbi Winnick had chickens in his backyard, and he slaughtered them according to kosher law, and made them available to his flock there. But it was also lots of people. If anybody remembers Harold Schersky, who ran Harold's Deli, he was born on East Vine Street. But that was it was a mixed race place. After 1915 or so, it was more and more African American. But it was on the hillside above the Bottom, which was the area that flooded. Probably the least expensive property in the downtown area was the Bottom, which is also called Cripple Creek, the place where First Creek, even to this day, kind of takes a crazy eastward crook and then flows back to the north. But it flooded a lot, and that was why it was so cheap down there, and also so dangerous. And at certain times of year when there were horrible diseases going through that time, typhoid and other things were an issue in Cripple Creek. But they had fun too, and they came up to Vine for that. This was also the place that the riot of 1919 happened, whether you call it the race riot or not. It was a lynch mob run amok that ran into armed black people on Central, and then they brought in the National Guard, more or less, was with the white mob, and they were firing at each other over a period of horrible several hours. And we don't know how many people died, but that was at Vine and Central. But for the most part, Vine Street was a fun place to be, and this was it was a place where the artists Buford and Joseph Delaney were raised on Vine Street. They were born and raised there, and got to know that this fascinating avenue that included lots of things. When they were young, the Carnegie Library, the first library just for African Americans, was built on Vine Street and operated for half a century there. The Gem Theater was a movie theater for Black people, and also late at night would have live music often there. There are all sorts of legends about different people who performed at the Vine at the Gem Theater and may not have been mentioned in the white press at the time. But occasionally they did have well-known performers that they brought in audiences there for that. They even had special showings for white people late at night sometimes. But they had barbershops and dance halls and pool halls. They had other movie theaters, and they competed with the Gem Theater. They had the hotels. We hear about the Green Book. All the Green Book hotels in Knoxville were mostly on East Vine Street. And they had the Carter Roberts drugstore, which was a fascinating place that sold a lot more than drugs. I'll mention it later. But also they had a lot of respectable daytime business. There was a medical arts building where Dr. H.M. Green, a well-known, nationally well-known physician, who was our last Black city councilman until the modern civil rights era. He worked there but was well known. He's actually president of the National Medical Association, which was an African American organization. And J.H. Presnell, another doctor that they called the Bronze Mayor. He was a Black man who would come out and greet when Jesse Owens came to town, for example. The Bronze Mayor, Mayor Presnell, would come out and greet him and welcome him to East Knoxville and Divine Street. We have a few pictures now, just a very few pictures. If you want to see a lot of good pictures, look at Bob Booker's great book, 200 Years of Black Culture. He has more pictures of Vine Street than I know of in any other source. But we have a few we're going to show right now just from our collection. And just to give you a little bit of a sense of what Vine Street looked like. Yeah, here's a pretty rare picture of a Central and Vine in the 1890s, and this was when it was kind of a mixed race area with a lot of immigrants coming in here. And I don't know what the ladies in the second floors are up to with kids on the ledge, but anyway, this is just an early and rather rare picture of that area. All right, next picture. All right, here's a pretty rare picture looking down toward Vine Street, kind of fading. It's like a foggy in the distance. But on the left, you see the Rabori fruits. That was Fiorenzo Rabori, was an Italian fruit vendor who sold peanuts and fruits from his more or less lean-to spot there on the side of what was then the public library. This was the Lawson Reeve, the main public library on Gay Street. And he built this place alongside and later bought the building, and it became known as the Rabori building. But as you look down, we're looking down east towards State Street, and most of the businesses east of State Street were either Black owned or directed toward Black market, Black customer base. So the place we're looking down, if you've heard of Marble Alley, that was over to the right of here, where where there's a well-known church, the Logan Temple Church was over there. This was a well-known part of town, but everything east of State basically was predominantly African American in most of the 20th century. All right, next picture. All right, here's the Gleaner Printing Company on Vine Avenue. It was a Black-owned printing company. It's interesting that there were several Black newspapers with the East Tennessee. There were several papers that were not just in Knoxville for the Knoxville crowd, but there was one was called the Flashlight. One was the East Tennessee Journal or something like that. But they printed newspapers for a predominantly Black audience because they knew that the white papers were not necessarily covering everything that they wanted to hear about. So that was this was another kind of an unusual, rare picture of a printing place in action, with several Black men and women working in this press room. All right, next picture. All right, this is a neat building, and I'm sorry it's not there anymore. If you know where it's on the the northwest corner of Central and Summit Hill, where the Merchants of Beer is now, that kind of diner style thing was there. This building was torn down a long time ago. I don't remember it myself. But if you look at this building, it's such an interesting, it's a picture of what this neighborhood was like, because on the left you see a place called the New York Cafe that was run by Greek immigrants. So that cafe on the ground floor, but this building is actually called the Cal Johnson Building. This was built by Cal Johnson, a former slave who became a very successful businessman and had some resources, owned some property, but had lots of interest. But this is his. If you look up here, this is one of his offices. It says Cal Johnson, and it says something about horse races and something else I can't quite make out there. What does that say? Paul?
I think it says deals or dealer.
Yeah, dealer. He worked in real estate, but there's a picture of a horse. He loved horses, and he of course had the Cal Johnson racetrack on the east side of town, which is now known as Speedway Circle. But just a fascinating guy, a really unusual business story, but a guy. Then again, this was one of the anchors of Vine Street down Vine and Central there. But a great old place. I'm lucky. I'm sorry this building is not here, but we do have one more Cal Johnson building still standing, and it has just been renovated. It's up on State Street, about a block and a half from here. But it's now just been renovated as a mixed use residential and restaurant space. But all right, next picture. Okay, I mentioned Cal Johnson. This is up on Gay Street, but at the corner of Vine, and this is Cal Johnson, one of Cal Johnson's saloons, and he called it, if you can guess, the Lone Tree Saloon, the only tree on Gay Street. We now plant trees on sidewalks. Back then, it was very unusual to have a tree on a sidewalk, but Cal Johnson was very happy with his tree and kept it there, and named his saloon for it. But that was one of his several saloons. He had a whole chain of saloons. Some of which were mostly for Black people, some were mostly for white people, but he was in charge of all of them. But this is kind of the east, more Western anchor of Vine Street. And I'm sorry it's not there anymore too. This was all wiped out. It's now a parking area on the 200 block of Gay Street near the 100 block. But all right, next one. Okay, here's the famous Gem Theater. This is I believe the second one that was built. The first one was burned down in a lightning fire in the early 40s. But this was a black movie theater. The size of it was a large theater, and I've heard various estimates of the size of it, that it might have held more than 1,000 people. But one interesting thing about it, it was built actually over First Creek, so that you could actually hear the creek flowing underneath the floorboards of the Gem Theater. But it was at the Gem that some people like Bessie Smith and Billie Holiday might have performed. We know that Ida Cox performed there. A lot of well-known people are said to have performed there over the years. People from traveling bands, jazz bands, were at the Gem. Maybe after they showed the movies of the day. But they showed both movies that were made for a black market, and also mainstream movies that perhaps on a second run were shown at the Gem. And it was a very busy, very popular place. Remembered by some, like historian Bob Booker has very fond memories of the Gem, as does the poet Nikki Giovanni, who remembers the Gem in some of her work. Okay, yeah. Oh, here's one more. This is from a somewhat later period. An interesting modern building. This is a mid-century modern hotel, motor court, or motel, which was on East Vine, not too far from Central. But this is a building that was built in the 1950s by a well-known family, the Dogan and Gaither family, that ran one of these motels directed just at the African-American traveler in the 1950s. When they were not necessarily welcome at most other hotels. But this was a place they were pretty proud of. In fact, the whole city came out, and I think the mayor of Knoxville came out and kind of cut the ribbon for this place in the 50s. And it was there for only 7 or 8 years before it was torn down, and they actually they moved to another location over near Magnolia and built another modern looking motel over there that's fortunately still standing and is going to be renovated. But an interesting looking place. What you see, the curved, kind of that curvilinear style that was popular kind of in the late Deco era, and the glass bricks. It was a stylish building in any part of town. But all right, I want to talk just a little bit about the legacy of Vine Street. I'm impressed with the different kinds of artists who have interpreted Vine Street. I mentioned that Buford Delaney, the well-known abstract expressionist artist, and his younger brother Joseph Delaney, who was more famous for street scenes in New York, both grew up on Vine Street. But while he was in New York, Joe Delaney remembered a scene from Vine Street that he painted in a painting that he called Vine and Central. We don't have a copy to show to you tonight, but it's at the Knoxville Museum of Art. Just bought it about 2 years ago. He painted it in 1940, and it hung in New York galleries for about 75 years. And many people thought it was a New York scene, just like his other New York paintings. But there's not actually an intersection of Vine and Central in New York, but there is a Vine and Central that was very important to his youth in Knoxville, and that was where it was set. But I encourage you to go over and look at that painting. Another homage that other artists have made to it is the Tennessee Chocolate Drops with Howard Armstrong and Carl Martin, who were Knoxville musicians. The original Tennessee Chocolate Drops, who were recorded in 1929, had recorded several pieces, including something they call the Vine Street Drag. Later on, Howard Armstrong told me that he meant to call it the Vine Street Rag, and it was a misprint. But a drag was another kind of song or tune that Fats Waller and people like that played with. So they just assumed that was the name of the tune, the Vine Street Drag. But that's on YouTube. You can hear that song if you want to hear it. It's right easy to get to. But also Nikki Giovanni, of course, the well-known poet of the Black Power movement in the 1960s, wrote a memoir of her life called Gemini, and in there she has a long essay called 400 Mulvaney Street, which is about her youth in Knoxville. And she talks about Vine. And I just want to read just a little bit of it to close. I mostly remember the Carter Roberts drugstore. And Carter Roberts drugstore was on the right, kind of going east, just not too far away from the Gem Theater. Carter Roberts drugstore sending out modern jazz quartet sounds of Fontessa. Can you imagine a jukebox and a drugstore that had an option that was the modern jazz quartet? I'm just trying to even picture any kind of a drugstore with that. That was really cool music in the 1950s. New music, fresh new music from a cool jazz band. An introduction to Nina Simone. This jukebox also had Nina Simone on it in the 50s. It said dropping a nickel in the jukebox and hearing Porgy coming out. Said, I mostly remember Vine Street. Vine Street is where I would sneak to the drugstore and buy screen stories and watch men drink wine and play pool. And then she says, and she writes this in the early 70s, she says, all gone. A wide, clean, military-looking highway has taken its place. And this is what happened to Vine Street. It was, they built the James White Parkway through, and then Summit Hill Drive. This was urban renewal. This is when we just like canceled a big part of Knoxville, just erased it almost. There are a few remnants here and there. There's a little bit of Vine Street. In fact, I'm on Vine Street right now. I'm on West Vine Street. This is near the Immaculate Conception Catholic Church. Our offices of Knoxville History Project are up here. Just the 3 blocks or so east, or rather west of Gay Street are still there. The Vine Middle School is still there. It would be on Vine Street. If Vine Street were still there, but it's still called Vine Middle. And Vine Avenue Furniture has kept its name all this time. It's down near Central, even though it's been on West Summit Hill for almost 50 years now. But on Vine Street, there's a Bob Booker Overpass. It's named for a guy that grew up knowing Vine Street very well and the best historian of the African American community. And now, as of the last couple of years, there's a plaque where the Delaney brothers were born and raised, a plaque honoring their home site, which even in their time was expected to be a shrine in the future, because even though white Knoxvillians in the 1930s were impressed with these artists who were going places, obviously, and they thought they would one day be famous, and that this would be their house would be remembered. But we'd completely forgotten about them by the time urban renewal came around, and I couldn't find any reference to the fact that their house was torn down in the 1960s when it was. Anyway, enough from me. I want to turn this over to the ringmaster, the never predictable Beauvais Lyons of the University of Tennessee. Beauvais, you want to take over from here?
Absolutely, Jack. Thank you very much. So I believe Nicole might have the video queued up that was created by my colleague Koichi Yamamoto. We should probably just start with that because that provides an excellent beginning introduction.
Every single person is connected one to the other. That's like us, connected. We're inextricable. 8 by 8 feet in scale. Brother Beauvais sent me a bunch of information about Knoxville and about the history circulating around within the Black community and just the community as a whole, and talking about its musical traditions and the different things that have taken place here. I believe there was a riot here in 1919 and different things that I was sifting through and trying to formulate an idea that I would develop. And one of the streets that stood out was Vine Street, which I noted that was one of the meccas of the Black community. It was along that street, and it had theaters and stores and spaces where they would meet and greet, and they would have opportunities for fellowship and breaking bread and all those things that are very keen to the African American community all across this nation. Vine Street was that space here in Knoxville. And so what I did was I made this kind of play on looking back, but I also made this play on looking forward. As you look at the image over to the top right-hand side, you see the street sign that says Vine Street, but right below the street sign at that corner, which is signifying by the idea of crossroads, a symbol of a space where we make decisions. I have those musicians playing there atop the record player, that the guy who's the DJ who's mixing and scratching, taking those old sounds and recycling them and making new music with them. And then even down on the album, underneath in the crate, underneath the turntables, you see the album cover from a group called Ohio Players, and the name of the album is called Honey. I put that there because of the medicinal purposes of honey. It's one of those nature's wonder drugs that works on healing so many different ailments and things in which we deal with in our bodies. And then across the image, you see right at the bottom, the arcing of the bottom, you see like a globe, and I show you the transatlantic slavery as I show you the figures that are embedded across the bottom right-hand side of the compositional space, so alluding to that system. As you see also Africa underneath the back of the Black woman's heel on the right side of the composition, leading across behind the man's feet, you see North America and South America, and you see in his hand a handkerchief, and I told you that was a symbol of the Holy Spirit. It also alludes to a bird, and if you look very closely, you'll see an eye and a beak on there. No, we gotta erase ourselves out of that thing and just do the work, and love and enjoy the beauty and the power and the brilliance of this planet and the people all around this world. Just got so much to offer, and we have so much to offer to each other, and we can't create these superficial boundaries in these things. And so that's been, I would say, the biggest obstacle has been myself. And I think I've conquered that. Not to say I don't hear those voices still. And it's been hard. It's been hog heaven, you know. And I'm hoping I'm depositing, you know, something that's positive for the students that I'm encountering. And I just love this whole idea of the community and the communal share. And I know how important it was for me when I encountered other artists that came to my institution, and I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with them and see their work, see their craft, see their work ethic. Let yourself go, make it, do it. Don't be afraid, jump out there. And that's what I had to learn as an artist, you know, to get past that fear. But I also had to get past my own insecurities, you know, not thinking I'm good enough, not thinking I'm smart enough, not thinking, you know, all this kind of negativity that speaks in your head and messes with you. Like when you apply for some kind of job or you apply for some kind of commission, and then you start second guessing yourself, doubting yourself, and thinking that other people are better than you and all this. No, I got all that stuff has been erased out of me. The second piece that I created here was called We Carry Generations. It's a 2-color lithograph that we created right here in the studio. For me, it was like going back in time. It was like growing up in my house, and if we had flipped and play around with these characters inside the composition, you would know that the 2 characters stand in the doorway, which also symbolizes a threshold, a place of change, a place of transition. I have that represents me and my sister, because my mom, what she would do, as my dad would play music in the study, me and my sister would basically be egged on by my mom, and we having almost like dance competitions in the living room. I remember those days, just dancing, tearing up that hardwood floor inside the house. My mom said, oh, baby, get it, Steve. Get it, Lisa. Come on, go ahead. You can do it. Oh, and we just danced hard and hard, sweat dripping off our bodies. Oh, it was so much fun. I know I'm probably bringing some memories for other people out there, but that's what it was like in our household. So much joy. And we carry that joy. We carry those memories. And we try to make new memories. We try to create new spaces. My first love in terms of art is drawing. I simply love the way in which I feel the vibration of the pencil upon the page. And that's the power of the space. You know, it's the power of the artist space, the artist studio. It's the cathartic nature of making, you know. The fact that you had nothing in front of you and you made it. You did it. You know, no one else did it. You made it. You know, that's power. Looking in the mirror, saying that, no, I'm good enough. I have something to offer this world. I have a purpose in my life, and I have to do the best and be the best me I can be, and take that idea of competition about being better than somebody else. I don't even think about that mess. That's a bunch of stuff, because there's so much competition built into our landscape that we're always competing. We're always trying to be better. We're trying to be the best, and it's nationalism. You know, it's just how we are. Or we're better than this country and that country. That's bull. It's bull. As a human being, and that their artwork has a meaning within this world, and they have something to pass on, and that has importance, and that's what you should be working for. Working to that light that's in you. It's community based, and many times when you're creating prints and you're creating editions, you need a community. You know, it's difficult for some stuff to do by yourself. Like that big print I came here to do, that's not a one-person gig. That's like 3 or 4 people to pull that off. You know, a lithograph, one person can pull it off, but it's so much better when you got 3 or 2. That we all can experience the second line together while we're alive. Y'all need to get up. It's time to dance. Come on, Beauvais. Come on, Queechy. Where you at up here? Hey, come on, do what you want to, folks. Come on, we're in a pandemic, but that don't mean you can't dance. Come on. Hey, come on. We got to do this while we're alive, folks. Hey, come on. I'm not dead. I'm alive. Y'all need to stop. Peace be with you.
So kudos to Steve and my colleague Koichi Yamamoto, who was the point person for printing the large relief print and also creating that video documentary. We only have Steve for 10 more minutes because as distinguished artist and director of engagement for the Muscarelli Museum at the College of William & Mary, he's teaching a class at 7. So I want to turn it over to Steve, and I'll talk a little bit about Steve more later after he has to depart. Just to offer, you know, it's been a month now since he was in Knoxville and we produced this project. And just some thoughts you have, Steve, on thinking about the project and history and representing history and other ideas. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Beauvais. Thank you, Paul, for the invitation to come here and share. It is, as I always say, whenever I have the opportunity to speak, it is both a privilege and an honor to be able to share and to speak about ideas and things in which you're doing. It does not seem like a month ago that I was there. It feels like yesterday, and especially seeing your face, Beauvais, just bring back all those memories. I wear my University of Tennessee mask very proudly around, and people always make comment about it, especially those who actually go there. The project that I did, as was stated in the video, Beauvais had shared some, I shouldn't say some, a lot of historical information to me to draw upon. When Beauvais and I met a few years ago, we talked about this idea of me coming there and doing some work and so forth. And he knows that I'm an artist that loves to do research and loves to build my pieces with a really complex narrative. Or should I say, I call it actually a polynarrative. And so the thing that stood out to me was that historical information about Vine Street. And there was a beautiful connection there because not from the fact that I've ever been there. It was my first time ever going to Vine Street to see with this project, but that Vine Street exists all across this country. It just has a different name. And in some instances, there are a few. I think there is another Vine Street up north, up in Chicago too, as well. And I think you also talked about in New York. But nonetheless, those cultural rhythms and those elements that are embedded within the landscape of the community was something very kindred to me. And so I took on some elements that come from my own upbringing growing up in New Orleans, Louisiana, and I infused it into that particular space. But it wasn't a hard infusion for me to do because I called the piece that I did there, I called it True Vine. And the True Vine alludes to the spiritual landscape or the spiritual scape in terms of what I was trying to go for. In thinking about what's in the composition outside the window is the oldest African-American church, which is an AME church in Tennessee that I actually put into the compositional space. That I believe, as far as I remember from the history that I looked up, that's not the original church. It was actually rebuilt. But nonetheless, it holds within it that lineage in terms of that history and how it is supported the community through the spirit. But I also put it there because when you start thinking about the African turned American, thinking about that experience, how important were the field songs, the spirituals, how important was the church, the blues, jazz, rhythm and blues, hip hop, all those things are all connected. And so when you think about the idea of a vine in terms of it meanders around and it connects to everything, and these leaves are connected to other fruit or coming from that vine, I thought about it from that context. In the fact that within the Black community and within virtually many different communities across the nation and around the world, there's this connectivity that you have culturally with the people, with the way in which you walk, the way in which you talk, the phraseology, the way in which you cook and prepare food. All those things go into the cultural rhythms. And so that's an element that is embedded within that piece that I was trying to go for. The other complexity of it is that I did not shy away from the heavier issues, because that is something that is germane to my work, in that when we think about this idea coming out of New Orleans, which is the dirge or the mournful tune, I liken that to those heavier issues that are going on societally that I believe that we must grapple with. And then also in the same piece, there's this celebration, there's this joy of expression that's going on inside the work. And that is the second line. You know, that is the music that's played for someone who's been laid to rest and they are now engaged in heaven. From my philosophical foundation, I'm not looking at it from that standpoint. I'm looking at it from the standpoint of that, can we have that celebration while we're alive? And one thing that I know that is very clear with him from coming from my cultural upbringing, and which actually lives in that next piece I created called We Carry Generations, you again see that joy and that expression that's embedded within the community. When I tell you something personal about my home, but I'm also talking about many other people's homes. And I'm hoping that other people can relate to it. Those kind of spaces within the home, that private space where you can have this freedom of expression and you're not worrying about how anybody looks at you or what anybody thinks about you. And again, that's something that I grew up with in New Orleans. I mean, think about Mardi Gras. I mean, people come out in the streets and do virtually anything out there in the streets. And so there is no worrying about how people look at you. There's this selflessness that's embedded there. But back to the True Vine piece, the other element that was there was I wanted to just talk about this idea of recycling, but not just recycling. I wanted to talk about this idea of the way in which people take the remnants or the fragments and they're able to create these delicacies out of them. And that is hip hop. You know, hip hop takes the fragments of sounds and mixes a few beats on top of it. And it's like making ingredients. It's like making a beautiful dish that we're going to actually consume, but it's sound. And we know that sound and sound waves affects our bodies and our minds. There is a balm, like healing property that's embedded within music. And so that's why it's so important within that composition to see the couple dancing and moving and the bodies arcing and the call and response to their bodies, and where in which the female is pushing towards the male body is arcing back as to receive that rhythm, but also to return it. You know, so all that's there. But if you look behind the couple, you would know that there's another couple dancing, which I did a lot of things with spatial dynamics inside the piece, where it's a composition that looks like it could exist, but it's one that can't, because they're literally dancing on top of the world. And I show you the whole global scape. But then if you move to one side of the compositional space, then you see floorboards underneath the guy who's playing the turntables. It looks like you could be there. But then when you look back to the couple, they're dancing on the other side of the world. So I'm trying to make this statement about the diasporic connections, the fact that so much was tried to be stripped from the African-American community, or the African turned America into America and so forth. But there's so much retention that comes from Africa that's still very much alive within the Black community, and our connection to the diaspora. And so that's another element there. But that couple that's dancing, I got their arms reaching up and so forth as they move. And if you look at the composition very closely, you'll note that there's like a shape of a rectangle above their hands. And I started thinking about this idea of the body as protest. The movement, the fact that we move, the fact that we speak, the fact that we dance, we sing, we create, all those things are acts of resistance to conformity, this drive to make a way out of no way, this drive to express that which is deeply embedded within your heart for the world to enjoy. That expression that not only feeds you as the creator, but it feeds also the community. So those are all those elements, I think, that again, that are very much important, that are very much embedded within Tennessee, which was very much embedded on Vine Street, but that's also on Bourbon Street. It's also in Treme. It's also in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's also in Florida. And I can go on and on and on to different places where you run into the street and that spirit of those people and that connectivity. So it was an honor to delve into that history and to draw on some of it and put it in there. And then also I did put it as Vine Street Rag as the intended name of the song. I didn't use the drag because I read the same thing about that. And so I said, let me go back to what the musician intended it to be, which is Vine Street Rag. And I put that on the album, and that's what he's mixing inside the compositional space. So there's other little nuggets in there. One thing as an artist that I do, because I talk a lot about my works and I share it all over the place, I tell you most of the symbols in there, but there are a lot of them I do not say. And I want to work with the viewer who is educated and that can see and to decipher and to put together that story for themselves. You know, I have my own story that drives that work, but I also encourage others to delve into it as well.
Steve, thanks. We're gonna, let's give Steve an applause for, you can see all the reasons why, it's clearly evident why we wanted Steve as a cherished colleague to come here and spend 10 days with us last month to produce this exceptional work. We'll give you space to make your leave to get prepared for the class your next Zoom that you're facilitating as host. And
Yes.
And Koichi and I will do the best we can to represent you in any Q&A that may follow. So thanks for being with us tonight, Steve. So Koichi, why don't you talk about your experience of this project, because you played a key role in the creation of that large relief print.
Well, watching how he engaged the work, you saw some image in the video that he's laying down the block, carving out with such a tiny tool, and then talking about how important sort of not having a doubt in yourself, but believing it and taking action and getting some kind of result out of it. And then he really demonstrated. So it was wonderful to watch him talk about it, and then he'd take action, and then he works with our graduate students in that way. It was very respectful, and yeah, learn a lot from him about the approach, how he faced his occupation in a very serious way.
So when Steve came, he had carved about maybe 80% of the block, and that was a 1/2-inch piece of MDF board, which is pretty simple, very accessible material. You know, it's sawdust and glue held together. He had done his initial drawing and composition based on research materials I sent him. And I just wanted to acknowledge the Knoxville History Project, because as someone who supports the Knoxville History Project, along with my wife, Diane, we really appreciate the work that the Knoxville History Project does, because a number of the resources I sent him were through the Knoxville History Project. So I sent him information on Bob Booker's book, The Heat of Red Summer, with an Amazon review of it that described parts of it. I sent him information on Ida Cox, and as well as the passage from Jack's book that has a good portion of a chapter devoted to Ida Cox. Information on Howard Armstrong. I made references to Brownie and Stick McGee, of course, the Delaney's, and links to the exhibit. The Knoxville City Councilman Isaac Gamon, and I noticed that Mayor Brown is with us tonight, so connections to the history of leadership in Knoxville, as well as information about Cal Johnson. So I think it's interesting to think of Knoxville as a kind of a text that can be interpreted and reperformed, almost like a song, you know, that can be restated in different ways. And histories remain alive, I think, when we can reinterpret them like oral traditions before written culture. They can be respoken and can become part of the contemporary experience as we like Vine Street, this vine that we weave that history into our experiences. So with that, I gladly turn it over to any questions that you might have for Koichi or myself, or questions for Jack and Paul about the history of Vine Street.
I have a question, Jack. I mean, the Vine Street, I guess where the dog park is, I guess right now.
Yeah.
And then that's all the neighborhood towards to the Cripple Creek, right?
Yeah.
And that area became there's a whole highway development. But when the highway was made, the development was taking place.
Yeah. The Urban Renewal was a national program by the federal government, and it was administered locally to some extent. But the idea was slum clearance. The idea was to, and it had some good aspects, because there were people in America in the 1950s living in third world conditions in cities. You know, they were people without plumbing, you know, people, they had to worry about disease and all these things. So it did do some good. It brought people out of this dire, extreme poverty in some places, but it also erased everything. I think they just, you know, manhandled the city and destroyed, you know, that whole east side of downtown basically, and just erased it. And but the dog park is where the Gem Theater was. And I don't want to blame the dog park. The Gem Theater was gone for 40 years before they built the dog park. But the you know, that was the same spot basically. If you look at that creek down there that's got that deep ravine by the dog park, that the theater was built over that creek. So that was all along Vine Street. But yeah, it was a national program, Urban Renewal, that was first posited during the Truman administration, and was, you know, administered by degrees over. Knoxville started doing it in the 1950s and finished in the early 70s. And by the time they finished it, people were saying, "Gosh, we think this has costs as well as benefits, and we think we're going too far with this." And that was the end of it.
Right.
But yeah.
So I should certainly mention the Beck Cultural Exchange Center, which was a partner for the exhibit we had, and I hope some of you got to see the exhibit of Steve's work, Living Epistle, that took place at the UT Downtown Gallery in September. But of course, an aspect of that Renee talks about frequently are the cultural implications of that urban renewal on the Near East Side of Knoxville.
And that's a great place when they reopen, a great place to see pictures of Vine Street as it was. I think they have the best collection of pictures of Vine Street.
I see that Brett Burdick has a question. How many prints were made and what happened with them? So the large relief print, we pulled, what, about 14 or 15 of those, Koichi?
That's about sounds right.
And most of them we sent with Steve. And then the lithograph, we ended up with an addition of 22, of which he took 12. So we have some in the print shop. One will certainly be placed to the Ewing Gallery collection and so forth. So
We printed on the book close. Do you remember, Beauvais?
Yeah. So most of the prints were done on Stonehenge printmaking paper, but we also printed some just on a book cloth out of Holliston Mills up in Kingsport. We often get end rolls donated from them for book arts, and it actually printed very well. And then Koichi, who's been printing on Tyvek, we printed it on Tyvek as well, because he's been making kites out of Tyvek. So, you know, part of our mission as a research institution is to pursue creative projects, and we learn from artists like Steve when we work with him. It helps us connect our research mission and our teaching mission when students are involved in helping to work alongside of us. All of us in masks and so forth, maintaining social distance. And so that itself was a kind of dance in order to achieve in this COVID time with this project.
I'm glad we got to show a picture of a print shop on Vine Street. That didn't occur to me until it is now. But the Gleaner Printing Company. I don't know if that was anything was familiar in there to you.
Rather than, you can see why I just wanted to turn the program over to Steve. He is an amazingly charismatic person. Yeah. During his time here, he gave a technical demo on watercolor monoprint. He had 3 Zoom events. There was a gallery talk that was also a sermon, because he's a man of the cloth. So I think it's the only gallery talk we've had so far at the Downtown Gallery I'm aware of that involved 2 prayers. And then his public talk that the audio was drawn from by Koichi that was used as part of the video you saw this evening. But certainly being a native of New Orleans, having studied at Xavier University, I was hoping there would be more references to Ida Cox, who spent a good deal of time in New Orleans before returning to Knoxville toward the end of her life. He got his MFA from Michigan State University. He's taught at a number of institutions, including Edinburgh College in Pennsylvania. But this is a great position he's in now, because he gets to be an artist and he's involved in community programming for the College of William and Mary, an institution which is the 2nd oldest university in the United States, and much of it was built by enslaved labor. So it's, I think, really interesting how that institution sees bringing an artist like Steve into their mission in order to address their own history and hold a mirror up to it in ways. And so we're so lucky to have the opportunity to bring Steve here. It was funded between the School of Art and the Vice Chancellor for Diversity and Engagement Office with Tyvee Small. And so this is definitely the kinds of things that we feel honored to be able to do with the School of Art programming, and to build those connections with the Beck Cultural Center. And tonight's program is another sort of way of extending this conversation. And we're already talking to Steve Koichi about bringing him back for another project. So when I saw his large prints for the show we were in together at American University in April 2019, I said, do you have a large press? How do you print these? And he's printing them all by hand. And then I told him, we've got a press for you. We should talk about bringing you to Knoxville. So we know Knoxville has been enriched by artists and writers who've come here from the outside and have left their mark on the city. So his project here hopefully will be part of that same kind of legacy.
Hey, Beauvais, I have a question for you. It's really interesting that he was doing a woodcut. That's not something you see every day. I mean, are there many artists in Knoxville doing woodcuts? Do you know?
Well, when you think about it, that's what Yeehaw Industries did with Kevin Bradley and Julie Belcher. So all of the letterpress studios are relief prints. There's a lot of woodcut taking place, I think, for a variety of reasons. What would you say are some of the reasons people are making woodcuts these days, Koichi? Because he does more woodcut than I do.
Well, I mean, it is a rather low tech, and it's a very physical. And it's interesting to see younger artists are growing up in this digital world. I think they are looking for some sort of a physical response from the carving the wood or, chiseling, these kind of activities, sort of part of that image making. Maybe they're hungry for that. That's my theory.
Right. Well, I think letterpress similarly is a response to digitally designed type and so forth. So you have that physical aspect of it. But you think about the history of relief printing. I mean, think about someone like Durr in terms of also in relation to religious representations, right? So Gutenberg's Bible itself. But there's all sorts of other histories of its use, say German expressionist prints as relief prints and so forth.
Small presses all over US, they have a capability of self-publishing it. which is kind of like this internet world today. We're capable of self-publishing it, but now young artists they're doing that in a little more in an analog way. Seems like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.